Good morning and welcome to Meet the Candidates for New York City Council Speaker. My name is Jose Ortiz Jr. and I'm the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. This morning, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Councilmember Carlina Rivera for the first of our scheduled conversations with the City Council Speaker candidates. Thank you to our members and partners that have joined us to hear from the candidate this morning. NYCETC supports the workforce development community to ensure that every New Yorker has access to the skills, training, and education needed to thrive in the local economy, that every business is able to maintain a highly skilled workforce. NYCETC's membership is composed of 190 workforce providers, education institutions, labor management organizations that provide job training and employment services to nearly 600,000 New Yorkers. Before we get started, all participants should know that you'll be muted for the duration of this call. Councilmember Rivera will be provided an opportunity to talk to us about her candidacy and answer some questions in a fireside format. We'll then open it up for a few questions from several members and partners. Please type in your questions along with your name, title, and organization throughout the conversation using the chat icon located on the bottom panel. If you're called upon to ask your question, we will unmute you so that you may ask your question directly to our guest. Please note that we will try our best to get to as many questions as time will allow. I want to thank Councilmember Rivera for her leadership and for being here with us this morning. For some background on Councilmember Rivera, Carlina Rivera represents the 2nd Council District, which includes the neighborhoods of East Village, Flatiron, Gramercy Park, Rose Hill, Kips Bay, Murray Hill, and the Lower East Side. She was born and raised in the Lower East Side and graduated from Marist College with a BA in journalism. Carlina began her career as a community organizer supporting seniors and people experiencing homelessness in the Lower East Side and decided to run for office when the area was hit hard by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Since taking office in 2017, Carlina has advocated for legislation regarding affordable housing, small business survival, equitable healthcare, transportation, and quality of life issues. Councilmember Rivera is the chair of the Council's Committee on Hospitals with the goal of better and more accessible healthcare for New Yorkers. She created the nation's first abortion access fund and advocates for ending of maternal mortality and morbidity in New York City. Carlina has also introduced legislation that proposes the creation of an Office of the Patient Advocate and has pushed for greater equity and cultural humility in the city's COVID-19 care and vaccine rollout. Additionally, she was the former co-chair of the Women's Caucus and sponsored legislation on sexual harassment and the gender wage gap. Good morning, Councilmember Rivera. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone.
It's good to see you. So let's get started. Well, before we jump into any questions related to workforce, why don't we just ask you the most important question: why are you running for New York City Council Speaker?
Well, I just want to thank you all for having me, and of course for all of your tireless efforts in creating jobs and building back better in the wake of this pandemic. So many New Yorkers have lost their jobs over the past year, and communities of color, specifically women of color, they've been disproportionately affected. So I've been a longtime champion of jobs training as well as sector-specific hard skills training. And I know our workforce should accommodate a marketplace that continues to shift and adapt post-COVID. So I just wanted to thank you all for everything you've done, because the last time I spoke to the Workforce Business Council in June, I was pushing for the $1 million in council funding for bridge programs. And since then, we've been able to secure the money to grow that initiative. And so I just want to thank you all. And of course, to my colleagues, council members Antonio Reynoso and Mark Traeger. So to answer your question, we're emerging from a public health crisis that has dramatically changed the way that we think about how to solve the biggest issues facing New Yorkers. So an active and results-driven city council is going to be absolutely vital to our recovery. And so I'm running for speaker so that I can prioritize building a future for New York City that is safe, that is equitable, and that's affordable. And New Yorkers are ready for leaders who look like, who share their experiences with them to make bold decisions and to lead our city into a just future. And I think that throughout my career, I've made it very clear I'm ready, willing, and able to work with anyone who has bold ideas, people who just want to make the city better for everyone. And so when it comes down to the real issues And I remember the last meeting in June, I was actually on the campaign trail, but when I'm out there and I'm knocking on doors and I'm meeting neighbors, they're not asking about ideological labels or alliances. They want to know that their elected officials have their backs and that we have a plan to make tomorrow even just a little bit better for them, and that they're going to have people that'll fight for them every day. And so, my background is, I grew up in the LES. I grew up living in subsidized housing with a single mother on supplemental food programs. My background is in organizing. I'm a fighter. I can and do and will bridge the gaps and build coalitions to win real results for the people of New York. And I think I have a record of delivering. So I'm excited.
Thank you. That was really great. And obviously, really understanding your background and why that really feeds into everything that you want to do and what you have done to date is really important for our membership to fully understand. And I think that brings us to the first question around workforce. And just setting the stage for a second, obviously, workforce really exists to uplift every New Yorker, to address income inequality and provide them with the 21st century skills, development, social infrastructure, and equal access to living wages and careers. It also exists to obviously support the talent needs of businesses of a variety of different scales here in New York City. But almost importantly, it's really to make sure that the city itself is the most competitive and vibrant economy in the world. So as the City Council Speaker, what workforce priorities would you work on in order to ensure that that we can build back better in a way that is going to effectively support the communities that you grew up with, you currently serve, and all the other communities across New York City?
Well, the best dollar spent on economic development is on workforce development. When we have a deep pool of talent, we attract major employers and new industries. And so we have to keep doing that. So when those employers and industries come, we have to be sure that they're hiring New Yorkers, that they're hiring from an existing pool of talent that we have here. And so the way that we do this is varied, and I've championed a number of programs to get us there. So economic development initiatives. So we have Civic Hall at Zero Irving, which is a digital skills training center with a number of partners like CUNY and Perscolis and FedCap. And that's to make sure that we're getting people into great tech jobs, because that's the fastest growing industry. And historically, people of color, women, we haven't really been represented there. And so this is specifically a place where you can go in, you can build your skills, you can work or start your own startup company, and you can eventually grow your business. Also funding for workforce development and training. We touched on bridge programs, and I think we'll touch on it a little bit more later, hopefully. And then local hiring and WBE targets. I think that's incredibly important, and we have to try to do that with every project. And local hiring is always difficult, unfortunately, to negotiate. But when we work with organizations and such as yourself, and when we work with our allies in labor, it can certainly become a reality, and it has in many, many ways. And then, of course, small business support and development. So I work very close with Renaissance EDC to create opportunities for very low cost loans for small businesses that need it, for technical assistance. So that way we can navigate what can be a very bureaucratic system with this kind of alphabet soup of agencies. And so we need, people there who have trusted relationships in the community, who are credible messengers, but who that also, speak the language, who also approach the work with cultural humility. I think that's all important. And then, of course, we need worker-centric business models. So worker cooperatives, which I'm a big advocate for in the council, of course. I think it's a really great thing to have in New York City that we have to grow. And then, of course, the business development initiative that's in the council. So I have been, and I'm working on all of this and more, but it's not just about the jobs, right? We have to be thinking about everything else, and we need to support our workers with policies that make a career possible, like from affordable housing to accessible childcare to functional transportation, real job protections, and a lot more. And we also need to establish a point of coordination, be it an office or a position, to oversee how all of these workforce initiatives work together. So I mentioned that alphabet soup, right? So we have programs and initiatives that are housed in EDC, right? The Economic Development Corporation. We have some in SBS, Small Business Services, and then we have some in HRA, Human Resources Administration. So we need to make a conscious effort to get a better sense of their overall combined impact and find opportunities for these programs to support one another. So that kind of interagency communication and the improvement of it is going to be critical in kind of moving forward what I think our overall goals are.
That's great. And you get into, and I just want to follow up a little bit on that, but you get into, the complexity of the system, and that obviously, and today we have 21 different agencies and departments that have workforce development programs. You mentioned the major agencies, but there's CUNY, there's DOE, and there's lots of other small ones throughout the city, and other large ones, in fact. And so that fracturing of the system makes it very complex to really understand what success looks like and ensure that dollars are being spent effectively. This is a major challenge. Are there other challenges that you see with the workforce system, and any suggestions or things that you intend to do to help to address them?
Well, I think it's so in terms of workforce priorities, I see whether you're thinking about which ones are successful, which ones aren't, which ones can be possibly kind of carried over, revised. I think it's going to be something that we have to look at very, very seriously. I know there's specific legislation that exists or can be drafted, and there's certainly budget initiatives that I think are really great. And I mentioned some of them that I consider myself a champion for, that I think are going to be really important to local hiring and people understanding how to approach, getting someone into a career path, not necessarily getting a job. So for me, I think what I'd like to do is doing everything we can to invest in support for MWBEs, green infrastructure, climate-focused development. These are all things I think that are going to be really important in the next few years. And that, of course, that's not limited to our annual budget. We've just gotten started in our work to support MWBEs, but we have not yet done enough, and we can do better. Yep. And I think that's going to take a lot of coordination with all of these agencies, but also the mayor's office, right? We're going to have a mayor who is going to, I think, come in with a lot of experience, and we need a council that is, independent, proactive, and that provides oversight. That's our charter mandated responsibility, and we're going to work very closely with you all to make sure that these programs work.
Yeah, to that oversight point that you mentioned, and because of the point that I raised earlier around the fracturing of the system, and that there are 21 different agencies currently overseeing workforce, and that, just to put that into some perspective, that is about 100% increase from 10 years ago, where that growth has gone from, I think, 11 agencies to 21 agencies over that period of time. And the council currently has a number of different committees that are currently responsible for oversight of workforce initiatives, but because they sit in so many of the different agencies. Would you create a committee of workforce development to help us follow that and more clearly understand how the dollars are being spent and whether or not they're being spent effectively by these different agencies?
I mean, I would be open to that. I think there are, right now, the Committee on Economic Development oversees EDC, which is important, right? It's one of the major agencies I mentioned that holds these kinds of workforce development programs, but not the only one, as you pointed out. So I do think there is a greater need to look over this, because I mentioned the MWBE piece, because those are contracts that go out for any number of issues, you know what I mean, whether programmatic or infrastructure wise, in terms of what's going on in the city with our capital funding. So that's something that kind of like transcends all of the agencies, but I would totally be open to that. I think there is committee restructuring that has to happen. I feel like there are some committees with tremendous oversight over multiple agencies, which is very important, but some of those issues are so much greater, that are so great that they need specific, I think, attention. I think our homelessness crisis, people experiencing homelessness, and certainly unemployment, underemployment, and workforce development. Those are two big issues that I think would need specific attention, and those issues can remain in the committee in and of itself. So yes, I'm open to it, and I think it's a good idea.
Great, that's great to hear. And I think just to clarify that even further, not for clarification on your end, but just to provide some additional detail, we have those 21 different agencies are covered across, I believe right now, 9 different city council committees. So it really makes it very difficult to obviously monitor success from a workforce development standpoint in particular. And so this committee structure, in our opinion, would help to address that issue around transparency and oversight. Just to go a little bit further on the funding question for now, and I think this in part is due to obviously a tremendous amount of hope from the perspective of New York City to receive significant federal and state support towards our economic recovery. Obviously, New York City was decimated economically and health-wise as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, the question remains for us is, how do you plan to incorporate, if possible, workforce into your recovery vision for the city?
Oh, well, there are a lot of things. I mean, I think you have to look at what's working and what isn't working. Again, I think this is the greatest value in terms of our investment. I think there are, again, if we look at kind of all of what's affecting us as New Yorkers and what we could potentially do to create workforce programs in that, I mean, we could start with resiliency. I think we need to be even better on resiliency infrastructure to combat the climate crisis, and we have to, which will provide for more green jobs and equitable growth. In my district, we're just getting started on this with the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project, which is the first resiliency effort of its scale, but we really need to be doing this in all districts because this is something that we're all experiencing. I think we're constantly working in the council on legislation that is going to ensure that we're prioritizing green infrastructure for the future. I'm working on legislation that kind of takes the urgent action we need in the face of the climate crisis. And I know the mayor had, in May 2021, he put out this stormwater resiliency plan that cited the need for basement flooding evacuation plans. And the goal to complete this was set for 2023. But when we saw what happened with Hurricane Ida, how it affected our infrastructure, how we saw people like our delivery workers wading through these waist-deep floodwaters, we need to speed that up. I think there's also a lot of potential, of course, in affordable housing development. I think that affordable housing and the creation of it is an economic development issue. I have a bill called the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act that would ensure we're doing everything we can to build affordable housing and prevent displacement. But this and any legislation that we propose, it's only going to be as effective as the investments that we make to support them. So, in leadership, I would return innovation to the budget process. I would work toward the council setting its own budget priorities rather than reacting to those that are set forth by the mayor. And so I think that is something that I would certainly be focused on. Again, we have some really great initiatives. We have to be smart as to some of the programs that we develop, especially with federal funding. Like I said, I can't stress this enough that the best dollar spent on economic development is on workforce development. I can't stress that enough. I would return innovation to the budget process. I'd work toward the council setting its own budget priorities, right? Rather than, again, just being in this constant reaction mode. And I think that we can set priorities that ladder up to the legislation that we pass and the needs of the communities that we serve. So I think, when we saw some of the funding that came in toward job creation in our most recent budget, we want that level of funding to continue, right? Some of these one and done programs, the $5.6 million that was allocated through the Cleanup Corps, we need to create, it's a great idea. I mean, we have some serious sanitation issues in this city, but we need to create permanent jobs, not just temporary or seasonal hires. So I think it's also critical that the future funding should come with built-in training and development programs so that people can take the job while they're still building the skills to grow into a long-term career. So that's kind of my overall vision, considering all the things that I've seen. But we know, again, like you mentioned, workforce development initiatives, that they're spread across various agencies. So we have to continue to expand the programs, and then we need our oversight and coordination capabilities to expand as well. So that's why we have to kind of look at the overall structure of course, our charter mandated responsibility of oversight and investigation, but also how we go ahead and pass that city budget. And then, of course, with our land use powers, how are we making sure that these contracts are going to MWBEs, but that also, we're making sure that there's local hiring and that we're incorporating all of these programs and that all of these agencies are talking together. So it's a lot of work to do, but I know, again, with organizations such as yourself and a very exciting, energetic, I think, innovative class of incoming council members, I think it's something that we can all accomplish together.
No, that's great to hear, and I think it was a really thorough response in terms of the areas that you hope to cover, because those are all incredibly complicated, and obviously, if we can work together to address them, I think we can make the system more effective and obviously serve more New Yorkers during an incredibly critical time. You mentioned the cleanup core piece, and I just want to draw that up for a second, because I think that one particular thing that I enjoy hearing from you is the connection of those jobs to to training and really connecting them directly to some type of permanent job versus them being a short-term opportunity. And I think there's no question that obviously there are quality of life concerns during a very difficult time for the city. But what's more important is that we're getting these double-digit unemployment numbers in particular communities, particularly those that are people of color, down to an area where we can provide, and if we can do so by providing training and further skills development for areas that you've mentioned, whether it's resiliency, whether it's tech, whether it's other growth sectors in the city around healthcare and other sustained employment sectors that we need to really build back and support the different consortiums that do that work around the hospitality work in the city and tourism, et cetera. We need to think really cohesively around what is a training strategy to support that, and we're looking forward to working more closely with you on that. You also mentioned the connections to economic development, and we agree. Workforce and economic development are fundamentally interlocked. They cannot be. You can't have one without the other in a city like New York City, and it's incredibly important to do so. In fact, when you're thinking about redeveloping or redesigning communities, how do you ensure that the communities that exist there can grow with that? And so we talk a little bit about that in our inclusive growth blueprint that we develop in partnership with the Association for Neighborhood Housing, the Regional Plan Association, and an incredible steering committee that we selected of leaders throughout New York City that represent the intersectional pieces that you mentioned earlier around food security and other pieces that make someone thrive in a city like New York City. Were there particular areas there that you thought were important and really stood out to you as areas that you need to address as a future speaker of New York City Council?
There are a lot of strong recommendations in the blueprint. I think there were over 50. I was particularly struck by the recommendations under people, and specifically to make health and wellness a core part of an economic development strategy. I talk about this a lot with city leaders. I talk about this a lot with incoming council members. Health and wellness is going to be integral. I think any and all efforts toward workforce development must have a people-focused approach. We need to be listening to workers. We have to normalize, people talking to each other inside the workplace, talking about conditions, right? That's how we improve workplace safety. That's how we are able to effectively change or even legislate conditions. And I think that's something that is very evident in what just happened, like with the delivery workers. And they were all talking to each other about what happened. And they realized that, this is a group that is historically marginalized, historically underserved and disenfranchised. And they realized, we're working really hard to kind of keep this city running and we're not being respected. And they organized. And so they have their organization and their organizers, and they were able to put together this movement and bring elected officials in, because I think, that's what I learned while I was growing up from the people in my life that taught me that, utilizing your elected officials is very important, right? In getting things done for funding for legislation. So I think that was a great example of how we have to talk about how people are being treated, but also how people feel in terms of just their holistic well-being, which is, I think, not just like some sort of, word or catchphrase. It's really, really important, because if you're not taking care of yourself, if you don't feel good, you're not going to be able to be your best self at work or best to your family. Mm-hmm. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our expansion of workforce development programs cannot be limited to business and industry. We have to be passing policies that make it possible for New Yorkers to pursue professional development. And some of these are really simple. We need to ensure housing, as I mentioned. I think that is an economic development issue. I think we have to make sure that healthcare is affordable and accessible to all. Again, if you don't feel healthy, how are you going to be able to take care of anyone else in your life? And we know in many of our communities, multiple generations living in households, how we are as primary caregivers. I think that's what's also exciting about the new class of council members. There are primary caregivers in there. There are leaders of nonprofits. It's very diverse. We have to make sure that there is high quality universal childcare, and that's available to families who seek it, right? We're parents. I think childcare will be a big issue now with a majority women council. I know that we have our allies and men and people who also understand, who are also maybe at home being full-time parents. But I do think you will come to light a little bit more, and magnified with the women in the council. And we also have to make sure that we're codifying job protections that make the workplace a safe and supportive place to be. And that can be anyone from, someone going into a larger office to, again, the person who is delivering our food and medicine on the street. And everything has an impact on our workers. And from transportation, which I think is the great equalizer. And, I understand some people drive, but the majority of New Yorkers do not. So how are we investing in mass transit? How are we taking care of our cyclist infrastructure for people who are commuting, but also their work is full-time on a bike? And then to public health initiatives. And we have to continue to uplift that fact in our legislation and, of course, in the programs that we're funding. So it is very intersectional. I mean, these are this conversation also entails talking about issues of race and identity and gender equity. And we can't be afraid to approach those topics. They're relevant in every single conversation. And I think that we need to have leaders, and we need to have a speaker that is not afraid to talk about race, identity, and gender equity in every single conversation, especially around workforce development, especially when you see the mass exodus of women from workforce, all the women who have lost their jobs, all the childcare issues that we're having. So I'm excited to kind of bring that perspective to the council. And I also know that, one of my responsibilities is mentorship, is support to the people coming in, so everyone can understand the legislative and budgetary process as soon as possible. So that way we can make sure that we're funding and growing the programs that work, and that we're being innovative and figuring out like what comes next as we adapt kind of during this part of COVID and post-COVID.
That's great. And I love hearing your emphasis on childcare. I think there were a number of different pieces there that you referenced, but we know that women were more heavily impacted as a result of COVID-19. Specifically as caregivers, right? They lost their jobs, or they had to go home and take care of their children. or take care of a loved one who is potentially at risk or sick, as women tend to do, being that individual in the household. But as a result, it's impacted them and will continue to impact them unless we address childcare. Will continue to impact them in terms of long-term getting back into the workforce and regaining the growth that we saw in terms of middle position jobs and executive level positions that we had seen significant growth over the last decade. So it's exciting to hear your focus on addressing childcare needs in the city, and hopefully we can get more parents back to work as quickly as possible. I'm going to talk just a couple more questions before we head into the Q&A with our audience today, because I know there's a couple really great questions in there that we want to get to. The digital divide was huge. The acceleration of that particular issue over the course of the last couple of years was clearly impacted our communities more than they impacted the larger community. There still is a large portion of New York City residents that currently do not have access to quality broadband. They don't have access to good technology in terms of smartphones or computers so that they can learn and earn from home. And this really impacted the workforce development sector as well. What steps, if any, have you taken or that you're thinking about taking to address closing the digital divide here in New York City?
I think I've been very vocal that we need to invest in universal broadband. As you mentioned, it became very clear. We already knew, right? We already knew pre-COVID that there's a digital divide. It disproportionately affects our immigrant community, low income, communities of color, our older adults, and our seniors. How we saw it really kind of just adversely affect these specific groups is because there was an understanding that a lot of the information available was going to be available online. We couldn't have the same interactions that we were having, right? We couldn't go to the senior center or the community center in the same way. And so people were dependent on figuring out like, oh, I guess I'm going to watch the news, or I know there was a program to, bring tablets to some of our seniors in public housing. But a lot of that also has to do with ongoing skills training, right? Like, how do you operate the tablet? How do you understand, what it means to have internet in your home, the costs associated with that. So I think that we need to invest in universal broadband. We can leverage state utility funding to do it, as well as explore declaring broadband internet a public utility. And that would make it possible to mandate that it be provided in every single household. And I know we have people working towards that, and I appreciate all my allies and colleagues in this fight. And further, we can make portable technology devices more accessible by providing them to participants in a wide variety of city programs, including job training and continuing education programs. And the city can and should also be using incentives and considering light manufacturing requirements to push innovation in lower cost portable devices that can either be made or at least assembled in New York City. So, all of this, the development of a fully, of a full universal broadband program, from assembling devices to training to installation, this is all a part of this larger picture that I think we are really trying to paint. So I think those are the things that we can do. Those are some concrete steps. And then, hopefully with what we saw in telehealth, and I'm the chair of the Committee on Hospitals, so we've talked a lot about telehealth. And I think that as we make this universal broadband a reality, people can engage and take advantage of that more often. Whether it's visiting someone's doctor or just checking in. I think, the mental health of our city is also a priority. And I think, if we can do a lot more telehealth with counseling and therapy, I want everyone to be 15 minutes away from therapy or counseling. I just think we have gone through so much we have not been able to process. And when we talk about 15-minute cities, it should be 15 minutes to something like that, is taking care of yourself. So hopefully we can get it done. I know, like I said, we have people in Albany that are working towards it, who are very smart, who are very dedicated, and it's going to be imperative. It's going to be absolutely critical to adjust recovery.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And just our last question is around a familiar subject for you, which is bridge programs. Obviously, you were an incredible advocate for this, along with Councilmember Traeger and Councilmember Reynoso Congressman Torres before he headed out of the council, and others. And so really appreciate your support on that. Obviously, we're able to receive an additional $1 million in support from HRA this past year to support tech training specifically. But we have a long way to go with bridge programs. There are an enormous number of New Yorkers that can continue to remain locked out of essential training to get them into job training programs here in the city. And bridge is really what bridges that divide, right? It provides those basic skills that are required for them to be a part of training programs and subsequently a part of the workforce. What can we expect from you as Speaker in terms of support around this area? Is this something that you hope to continue to champion? Can we have your support on that front?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, the bridge program was my initiative along with my colleagues, and I'm so proud to have their support in continuing the program for a second year. So without a doubt, these bridge programs would continue to be a priority for me as Speaker. The Goodwill Bridge program is specifically geared toward the tech industry. And I mentioned how we're doing Civic Hall and how important I think that the support for skills training is important, especially, in a fast growing industry. But we need to be expanding these programs into other high growth sectors in the city. I mean, these include, but not limited to, life sciences, entertainment, hospitality, gaming, design. I think far too often the programs that are available to New Yorkers using something like the career services component at HRA, that's for jobs. Those aren't careers. And so it results in low retention rates, even lower wages. And these programs are great for early employment training, but there are a lot of people who need more advanced training to get on a career pathway. And so bridge programs assist people with getting the technical qualifications they need to step into rewarding careers in these high demand industries. And so we have to make sure that we expand them in the future. I'm committed to funding bridge programs. I think I said that already, but we have to provide clear paths for people to grow and feel stable and have something sustainable. And I fundamentally believe that workforce development investments are the best investments that we can make right now as our job market is recovering. So bridge programs not only provide secure employment to low-income New Yorkers, but also it makes New York City more appealing to larger employers who are considering moving to New York. And that's what we have to do, is develop our talent pool, attract employment, and make sure that we are creating opportunities that are available and accessible to everyone. And so that's the partnership that I'm really excited about. That will certainly be a priority for me. Should I be chosen as the leader?
Thanks, Councilmember. So we're now going to actually head into a few questions from our members. And as I mentioned earlier, we call up our members to ask a question directly to you, so you'll be able to see them face to face. Our first question comes from Anthony Batantes, who is the outreach specialist at the Center for Employment Opportunities. Anthony?
You never know. Give him a second. There, I see you. Now we just gotta.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So nice to meet you virtually. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to get picked, so I appreciate you giving me a second there.
Welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been great. Thank you. This has been a great event. I've loved everything that you've had to say thus far, Ms. Ferrera. So this has been
Oh, thanks.
it's been awesome. My question was actually about reentry programs. You know, I am actually the outreach specialist for the Center for Employment Opportunities, and we deal exclusively with people coming out of incarceration, and we you know, help them find long-term employment. And I know as you know, the city, as you know, things are changing as well, obviously, and they're I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts on like the roles of reentry programs to help with workforce development and getting more people, you know, to employed in New York City, and also if you plan on funding reentry programs, or if you have a plan for, you know, what to do with a lot of you know, the surge of more like parolees and probation you know, citizens here in New York City.
Absolutely. I think we have to funding reentry programs are going to be critical. I think for people who maybe they don't have a personal connection to knowing someone who's been just detained at Rikers, incarcerated. I mean, for me, I have my own personal family members and friends who have been inside of the system, who have been incarcerated, who have come out as a returning citizen and really need the help and support that to grow, to be able to develop skills. I think it's a really important topic because, first of all, we all know the people that are incarcerated are disproportionately Black and Brown, that they are people who historically have not had access to workforce development, the same educational programs. So you're starting almost from scratch, as well as having a history that provides tremendous barriers to gaining employment, to even gaining housing. So I think when we're talking about reentry programs, we have to make sure that there is access to changing technologies, that there is access to kind of what is the state of workforce development and employment now. And so these are the skills that you will provide. And that's something that I want to be a part of. I think also it has a lot to do with, again, understanding this kind of criminal justice system and what is available to people who are incarcerated in terms of, you know, what are the programs and services that are available to them while they're there? And as they come out, what is the support system that they have? So we can go into budget initiatives. We can certainly legislate things like, you know, banning the box. That is a big initiative that has been kind of a nationwide movement. And so it's with individuals like yourself that I know are committed, that I know really care about this work, that we can develop and expand some of those reentry programs, and then making sure that we're also passing legislation to complement the work that you're doing. So I know, I just think about my own personal family members who were incarcerated 25, 30, 40 years ago, and they're still, you know, overcoming challenges, tremendous challenges to really be out in workforce, to have a good job, to be on the pathway to a career. And I don't wish that for anyone. I don't wish that sort of challenge, that sort of hesitancy. You know, it leads to a lot more that I think that we can address as a city and as a state. So I'm really interested in working with you all. I think I have tremendous respect for what you do. And so the short answer is that I do support it, and I certainly want to work with you all. I think in the council, we've tried to address some of this, especially for our young people, right? In the end, we would really try to work towards alternatives to incarceration. But for those who need the support of reentry, we also want to make sure that those individuals are not being exploited. I mean, we have legislation around body shops. We know that those individuals are and many times taken advantage of. And so we want to make sure that they're surrounded by a support system that understands and cares about them. So I thank you for all that you do. And you know, we would love to work with you specifically and any of the other groups here who are working on this issue.
Thanks, Councilmember, and thank you, Anthony, for the question. Our next question is from Annette Gonzalez, who is a CUNY student. Annette?
Good morning, Councilmember Rivera. Thank you so much for everything that you said. I am in shock that there's actually somebody who is full force with making sure that everybody is able to attain all these resources. I do have a question where it comes from a CUNY student perspective. As you know, CUNY free is one of the biggest issues that we have going on right now. What is I guess, are there any initiatives when it comes to reinstating trade schools? Not everybody has the privilege to attend CUNY. So I just wanted to know, like, what were the next options?
Well, I would love, I'm with you on the right to a free, high quality, higher education at CUNY for all, right? New York City, the high school graduates, people who get their GED, right? Regardless of who they are or where they're from. So I do support that. And I think it would be an absolute game changer. I also know that college isn't for everyone. I mean, in the traditional sense, right? I have many people in my family, they tried it. They really gave it a go, and it's just not for them. So I think the trade piece is, I'm so glad somebody brought this up because it is something that I would love to develop. That was the whole point of doing Civic Hall at Zero Irving, which was to go in there, right? You're going into a digital skills training center where we have some fabulous partners. We have CUNY, we have Perscolis, we have FedCap, right? These are groups that understand, these are organizations that understand that there are going to be populations that, you know, it's like teaching, learning, listening. You have to take a global approach to all of those things. And so not everyone understands, comprehends, learns the same. So if we can figure out, I think, how to do more trades, I think even when it comes to things like tech, there is so much behind the scenes. There are so, you know, things, understanding how things work, mechanics, really computer science and kind of the machinery of it all. There's so much to be done there. So I think the trades are actually really, really important. And so whether it's working with our allies in labor, whether it's developing something like a Civic Hall at Zero Irving, but in, you know, a kind of another industry, right? I mentioned life sciences, I mentioned entertainment, hospitality. These are all very, you know, fashion. These are all very big industries in New York City that we could be training people to work in. I mean, Fashion Week brings in more money than the US Open, right? There is so much, there's the creative economy. There is so much there that we can be really making sure that people have access to in terms of hard skills, lifelong skills on a career path. That doesn't necessarily mean getting a bachelor's in journalism, which is what I got, which I loved. Here I am. So I agree, it's not necessarily for everyone. I do think education comes in many different forms. And so maybe, you know, maybe that trade school, right, it has a lot of the things that you would maybe receive in a traditional kind of college course or campus, like that sort of educational program, but really teaching you some of the skills for that sector that you hope to be joining. So I think it's absolutely critical. I think we can do it in some of our educational institutions. Like, this should be a part of a lot of those actual brick and mortar facilities. And then of course we can have standalone centers like the one that I'm doing that I hope is a model, and we could do it even bigger, even better, more efficiently, right? Some of the things that I try to be innovative in bringing in my district, I'm hoping as a model, right, that people can learn from it and do it in a way that's appropriate for their district, appropriate for their community, and then figure out how we can keep doing a version of it that kind of adapts to where we are in our own city's history and of course the future.
Thanks, Annette. Our next question is from Robert Tucker. He's the owner of Black and White Training LLC. Robert.
Hi, Councilman Rivera. Thank you for being here. These forums, these Zoom forums are so great because it allows us to, you know, get together and express our ideas from different areas. One of the things that struck my mind about contracts, minority business and women-owned contracts. I read in a paper that about 3% of city contracts have been awarded to business owners who are minorities and women. I'm wondering what can be done in order to create more accessibility during the bidding process and during the initial process, so that we can be afforded opportunities bid on contracts, as minority and business owners. Unfortunately, a lot of times we're at the back end of contracts having been awarded, where we haven't had the opportunity to actually put in our 2 cents more or less to try to ascertain some of this funding. It was just shocking that 3% of contracts were that in the city of our diversity. So I was wondering, is there anything that can be done that would allow for us to have more accessibility to bidding situations and contracts?
That's a good question, because some industries are right, they're different than others. Like there's some who are a little bit better on hitting that MWBE percentage. And I know that 30% is a number that gets thrown around a lot. I mean, we are a majority women, majority minority city, but that's kind of the number that we hear over and over and over again that we're trying to attain that we still can't quite reach. There's a few things. I mean, when I mentioned some of the agencies that we have to deal with small business services, there's actually someone inside of small business services that is specifically supposed to work with kind of minority and women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. But when it comes to the contracts, I mean, that is something that remains, I don't want to say intentionally, because I don't want to be that person, but sometimes I feel like it's almost unattainable by design. It's really, really hard sometimes to break into that. I think the technical assistance and the support that some of our people need is not quite there. Like we're working on it, but I think there have to be a very intentional effort. I know they say, oh, we do workshops, but you have to really utilize the organizations that are already there. Like you can't just, put up a flyer and say, we're going to do a workshop on understanding, how the bureaucracies to overcome, to respond to an RFP and potentially acquire and be chosen for some of these contracts. So I think that we have to do a little bit better at engaging some of our community-based organizations and institutions and bringing kind of that technical assistance as to how to engage in that process a little bit better. And I think the council has been trying, right? We've used some of these models or something like the census, where we brought in all of these community-based organizations because they understand like cultural nuance and sensitivity, and they're credible messengers. So I think it has a lot to do with kind of that technical assistance. I mentioned earlier in my remarks that I'm working with Renaissance EDC. They're very good at providing technical assistance to some of these individuals. But, and I know there are a version of Renaissance EDC in lots of other neighborhoods. But I think it also has a lot to do with how we engage with the mayor's office. I mean, they have a ton of power over on that side and how these bids are chosen. And so we have to make sure that, we have a comptroller that's holding them accountable and auditing a lot of what's going on. And I think we'll have that with the incoming comptroller. So it's unfortunate that, when we read about these sort of percentages they're unacceptable. And again, even with employment, even with employing, Black and brown individuals and women, it depends. I mean, we're trying to get even better when it comes to things like construction, right? And making sure that we're uplifting organizations like Non-Traditional Employment for Women, who actually Civic Hall at Zero Irving, that's a signature project for them. So we have to make sure that women, Black and brown individuals, our immigrant communities are represented in the workforce, and of course the people overseeing and engaging and having these contracts. So a lot of it is holding the mayor's office accountable and then working with organizations who are actually in this Zoom to make sure that we're getting the outreach done and that y'all are being like compensated for it. Like you have the resources to do it. We can't keep like dumping activities and requests on nonprofits, asking them to do things for the city if they're not being adequately supported. So I know that's also our role.
Thanks for mentioning that, Councilmember. And we want to try to squeeze in 2 more questions,
Okay.
get you out of here on time. So we have our next question from Helen Kogan, who's the Executive Director of Empower New York and an ETC board member. Helen.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Council Member, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see you again. We know that true workforce success depends on public and private partnerships. How do you suggest that we incentivize the industry to continue to invest in New York City when so many local communities are adamant about not allowing corporations to set up shop in their neighborhoods?
This is a good question. And I just want to thank Empower because I know what you will do, the tech skills training, making sure that people are placed in quality jobs, and how you work again with these historically underrepresented communities, specifically in the tech center. So I want to thank you for your work. I will say that, this is an interesting question because you're right, there is some pushback and mistrust, and we can just look at tech. We can look at like big tech. I've taken them on multiple times, right? Whether it's Airbnb or individuals like Grubhub and the delivery workers. But I also know that there are socially responsible corporations who try to come in and be a partner. I think it's really up to us as city, state, federal workers to make sure that one, that we're regulating them responsibly, and two, that we're engaging in conversations with them early. I mean, some of them who don't want to talk to the community, that becomes pretty clear from the onset, right? Out from the beginning. So I think it depends. Like I have Google, I have Facebook, I have these companies specifically around tech that exist in my community that people don't really trust. And, we haven't really quite gotten to the root of how strong, big tech is there. It's very, very influential, like real estate is. And I think, when it comes to making sure that these are good jobs, that they're not taking advantage of kind of the city and state benefits that might come with developing something in our communities, it really is up to us to have that sort of public engagement. I mean, I try to bring, communities, community boards, civic leaders all together to have these conversations early. And sometimes what it takes is, action from us. It could be something on the street. It could be legislation. There are tons of things that we can do to improve the relationship. And that all starts with early conversations. And yeah, some people are kind of averse to change. It's hard, but this is a city that is constantly changing and evolving. So I think we can bring in new neighbors and new opportunities without wrongfully assuming, right, that we can't trust some of our larger partners. We have to support our smaller organizations and these smaller businesses, but there is also an opportunity to engage in, I think, corporations that are socially responsible and who understand that there is a history in these communities that they're coming into, and people always have a fear of gentrification and displacement. I mean, I'm from the East Village, I'm from the Lower East Side, like we're ground zero for gentrification. And so that is always something that I wake up thinking as to how do we kind of preserve the culture and the fabric and the diversity while also bringing in new opportunities. So it's a very careful kind of walk, but I think it all starts with kind of public engagement and understanding you can't make everyone happy, but you surely should try to find a responsible compromise that always is for like the long-term gain, right? That sees the bigger picture. That's what I try to do. And, sometimes you'll meet some opposition, but if I speak to everyone along the spectrum, right? People in favor, people opposed. And typically those conversations end up in me having significant changes, recommendations to whatever the plan is, and trying to figure out how we can improve whatever situation we're in.
Thank you. And our final question is from Maria Lozado, who's the Executive Director of NYMIC. Maria, the floor is yours.
Oh, am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
For doing this today. So we've had to embrace technology as a new way of service delivery. And we've had pushback from city agencies who want us to do business like it was before COVID. So what are your thoughts on pushing city agencies to be open to technology, to doing services differently now, because it is a new world and our community members have also embraced using technology?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. There is no doubt that's non-negotiable right? Technology is here to stay in so many kind of comprehensive, complicated ways. And there is so much potential, right? If you can really kind of take full advantage of what's out there. So I think that there has to be a citywide plan for how we utilize technology with our city agencies, our nonprofits, how we fund the adaptation, the evolution, the all of that. I think that has to be a larger plan for the city of New York. And so I'm hoping that even the mayor's office will have someone who's pretty much kind of dedicated, right? Like a CTO, someone who is dedicated to talking about this type of thing, but that who also has a dedicated department or office and figuring out how are we making sure that all organizations, regardless of their size, have access to what's appropriate for them. So I remember when I first got into, when I was working in a nonprofit and making sure that, you know, we were trying to incorporate technology. Maybe it's just something as simple as upgrading our client services system. And I remember I was trying to bring in Salesforce or whatever worked. I mean, there are things that you can do that can totally change the way that your organization kind of adapts and again, kind of just moves forward and progresses. But you also need the support, right? Salesforce costs money. You know, improving your actual physical technology costs money. And so I think that these are easy investments that we can make that allow you to provide the programs and services that we rely on you for. So I hope there's a larger component inside of the mayor's office. And I do think that, you know, if I'm given the opportunity to lead this body, like technology and our appropriate adaptation for it at every single level, regardless of the size of your organization, is going to be one of my priorities. I mean, just social media alone can be such a powerful tool, and people do not quite have the access to implement a full program. So, you know, and again, we have to make sure that those people who aren't as familiar with it also have access to it. And I think we learned that pretty deeply during this pandemic. So I know we do have a lot of work to do, and I just want to thank you all for continuing to be there, especially for our communities that are just historically just haven't had the access. You know, I come from very humble beginnings. I am very, very privileged and honored to be in this position representing where I grew up. And I love this city so much. I want everybody to feel like they will be able to not just survive, but thrive here.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I know we're over time, so just really want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we really appreciate you being here with us, but also just being a champion of our space and our sector. As you mentioned, we have a lot of work to do, and we're looking forward to, in whatever capacity, doing that work with you together over the next year. A quick program note, please join us on Monday, November 8th for the second installment of our Meet the Candidates for New York City Council Speaker. We'll be speaking with Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, followed by Keith Powers on Tuesday, November 9th, Councilmember Justin Brannon on Wednesday, November 10th, Councilmember Diana Ayala on Tuesday, November 30th, and Councilmember Adrian Adams on Friday, December 3rd, with other announcements to come in the following days. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, we want to wish the best of luck to Councilmember Rivera for being, I want to thank her and wish her the best of luck with her candidacy. We enjoy speaking with her. We enjoy speaking with all the candidates to come. And we really appreciate you all being with us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.